Welcome to another exciting episode of Unraveling Intellectual Property with Michael Stein, where we cover intellectual property, but a whole host of other topics as well. And today I have a super friend, an incredibly bright guy who does all kinds of things, helping with charity and doing science related stuff. I would like to introduce my good friend, Dr. Aaron Tabor.
Yeah, Michael, thanks so much for having me today. You've been such a blessing to me over the years, so very happy to be here today.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your background and some of the things you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a medical doctor. I was blessed to get into Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, where they have a real heavy focus on medical research. And I was going into reconstructive cranial facial surgery, but my mom entered menopause and have a wonderful mom, wonderful dad, and wanted to help her out. And so I created and patented a, a protein drink that really helped her make it through menopause. And that was actually my first foray into getting trademarks. The product's name was Revival. And that was when the time you had to drive down to, I guess, the USPTO repositories. I drove down to NC State and pulled up, did searches and it printed it out on a dot matrix printer. But since then, all of that led to pain cream development, topical skin cream development, and now finally into drug development, which is a lot of very interesting intellectual property issues, particularly around trademarks.
Well, we're going to cover the IP in another podcast. Let's go to the FDA process. I know you're heavily involved, I believe, even right now. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. I started a drug company with Johns Hopkins. It's called the Johns Hopkins Fast Forward Technology Program. And we're using non-viral DNA to create first genetic aesthetic products. So these are products that would tighten the skin, hopefully restore hair loss and any common cosmetic concern, and then use that technology to pivot into helping kids in particular with rare diseases, really terrible dermatology diseases where their skin is blistering off, or they have too much skin, or maybe in some cases they don't have DNA repair enzymes, so they have a 10,000 more fold chance of getting a deadly cancer than you or I do. So we're starting out with the easy aesthetics and then progressing into some really painful areas that could benefit a lot of kids.
Where, what countries, I mean, I don't think this is common in the United States, correct? Like what countries are the
Well,
most
yes, surprisingly, these are rare diseases, so you have just such a small number of population. You can go be in medical school for years and then do years and years of training. And most doctors have never seen a single child with one of these, rare diseases. So yeah, I typically have to go to specialized academic centers, whether it's Hopkins, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia is another great area. You go to these very tertiary care centers and you can come across these children. But it's interesting that the incidence and prevalence of these diseases are the same in America as they are in other parts of the world. Just happens in many other parts of the world, particularly North Africa and Southeast Asia, and a lot of places in Europe. The governments do not have the money just to provide basic medical supplies, for example, bandages, blood transfusions, antibiotics, a lot of things that you need when you're bleeding and losing skin. Um, so primarily the children we minister to by getting them the critical life-saving medical supplies are outside of the United States. Thankfully, we have wonderful coverage here for uh, um, just the necessary bandages, massive amounts of bandages.
when you go through this FDA process, what is the entity that is developing the drugs or the drug or
hmm we're incorporated in the state of Delaware as a GENIE, GENIE. It's an acronym for Gene Enhanced Neo-Integument Engineering. So we're trying to re-engineer the tegument, the which is your epidermis, dermis, your hair follicles, your sebaceous glands, that integumentary tissues. And really blessed to be under the Hopkins umbrella, with Hopkins as being a part owner of the company, because we get access to a lot of top tier research doctors there that have really enabled us to get patent enabling data. Now we're at the phase where we're um, getting ready to manufacture the drug. It was a big surprise to me that the hardest part of developing a drug is actually manufacturing it. It's really beautiful to see the purity that the FDA requires to manufacture a drug. It's much, much stricter than prior businesses I've been involved in with, from the food products or the protein shakes to the OTC pain creams. The level of scrutiny and testing and release testing and quality controls is just awe-inspiring. Sometimes it feels overwhelming, but we've been blessed to get former FDA workers, so they've really demystified the entire process for us. So now we're just working our best every day to execute.
so where's this research being done? Is it being done in Baltimore at Hopkins?
All the initial proof of concept work, this is where you take your initial drug, whatever it is, a small molecule drug, a DNA drug, some form of a biologic, and you typically test it in vitro at first, in the culture dish, get your readouts, see if it's performing the way it is, and then you progressively move towards humans. That's ultimately what you want to do, is to get this FDA IND that allows you to then start your first in human studies. Our first in human studies will likely be done at the clinics of some of our current owners, which is nice because we're not having to contract with third parties. So we like to say a lot of our owners are doers, right? Whether it's the proof of concept work being done at Johns Hopkins or the future possible human studies will be done by people that actually own part of the company. That way we can just make sure they're, really putting their heart into it to make sure we're properly conditioning the skin, properly applying the drug, where it's just not a third party that's hired that may not have the as high of quality standards as we would doing it ourselves.
So you start this company,
Yeah.
and then at what point do you have to get involved in the FDA process? Is it right from the get-go? Are you able to do some research? How does the initial phase of the FDA process go?
Yeah, well, one, I think anyone starting a drug company doesn't know what they're getting into. So I'd say ignorance is bliss. So when
Right.
you I'd seen some of my older mentors start drug companies or have drug companies, and that kind of made me, well, okay, I can do this too, these are great guys and I understand what they're doing and what they're about, so I can do it too. But yeah, once you get into the details of it and you understand the complexity that the FDA requires, which we have the strictest, gold standard in the world of for drug regulation here in America, you really want to make sure you've got the right people on your team, because it really comes down to what type of knowledge level your team members. But to answer your question, the first, few years, you can really be in that proof of concept mode where you're trying to, okay, what is your drug? Do you have intellectual property rights to the drug? Can you create something new and innovative and unexpected with it? Maybe it's a delivery system. Maybe it's the particular disease you're targeting that you can then obtain intellectual property on, because without the intellectual property, it's really hard to get anybody interested in investing. And to make any progress with the drug, to get to the very first FDA steps, you're looking at millions of dollars. So that either has to come through equity for services, where you can get people like Johns Hopkins, that have a lot of laboratory time, a lot of postdocs in there that are willing to perform the studies and help you build this portfolio of this early proof of concept data, or you have to have super influential circle of friends and family where you can raise a lot of money just to get
Yeah,
that
I don't
initial
have
work
that
done.
friends and family network. Maybe you do.
No, I unfortunately I didn't, but we were able to, f blessed to find a lot of people that were very interested in the technology and the overall mission to, use the aesthetics to help then the children with these terribly painful skin diseases to buy in, to buy into that philosophically, intellectually, and say, yeah, we'll take equity in the company to help you get this work done.
And so you get started, you get proof of
Mhm.
concept. At what point do you say, I've got to go through, start the FDA process?
Yeah, so it's really a well-defined process. The FDA's been much more flexible in recent years to work with small startups, small biotech startups, which is really good. I found them in our first meeting to be very amenable, very flexible, very informative to answer questions that we have. And you have to figure out what type of a meeting. There's several types of meetings that you would want to initiate with the FDA, with the purpose being that you can determine what type of safety studies and what type of manufacturing standards do you need to meet so that you can then return to the agency to present all of the data that would then allow you to go into first in human studies. So
Let me
that,
just let me
yeah.
just interrupt, and this is because I want to keep these segments fairly short, and we're going to have a part two. This is the end of part one,
Okay.
and I'm going to get Aaron back here and for part two, and we will discuss the continuation of the introductory part of the process of the FDA approval. So thanks for watching Unraveling Intellectual Property with Michael Stein. Stay tuned for part two of this podcast.